Hello everyone and welcome to mission 2 of our Bluetext lab, in which we're going to be creating a full stack maintenance request form portal where a user can submit maintenance request forms and view their previously submitted maintenance request forms. This web app is going to be a full stack web app we're going to make with Bluetext that's composed of 3 main services. Couchbase, which is where we're going to store our data created by filling out the maintenance request forms. The front end, which is from where we can actually fill out the maintenance request forms and view the form, and the API, which is what's going to act as the bridge between the front end and the back end and allows us to send data to Couchbase from the front end. So let's head on over to the add and run services section and add these 3 services. So let's start with the Couchbase server first, and we're leaving all of the parameters blank, by the way. Then let's go with the Python Fast API, and finally the React web app. Now, there is actually a 4th service that we are going to need to run after we add these 3 core services, which is the service config manager. We can run this with the blank parameters. Now, this service is what's going to be responsible for actually configuring the Couchbase key space, which is the default collection and the default bucket. It essentially creates us or allows us to store data somewhere in Couchbase with our given setup. To actually configure this service config manager to actually configure our Couchbase server, we can select the name because we left ours blank. It was called Couchbase server by default. So then we can just select service to manage, type Couchbase, and then run that tool. Now, to double check that's complete, we can head on over to port to localhost 8091, and our UI should look something like this. We don't need to log in now, but we can log in now just to have a look. The credentials are ASDF as the username and ASDF as the password. So now you can see if we go to documents, our key space has been created with the main bucket, the default scope, and the default collection. We're going to be creating our own collection in a bit, which is where our data is going to be stored. Now that we have Couchbase itself configured, we can start configuring it with our API. So for that, we need to add the Couchbase client, which scaffolds out the Couchbase client code into the clients directory, which has already been scaffolded out during our first tool call. So in our clients directory. There we can see it under Python clients, Couchbase. The last tool we're going to have to call is setup service for client, in which we actually set up the API to use the Couchbase client. We're going to fill it out like this. So the client type is Couchbase. The consumer is the Python-fast-API, which is the name of our service because we left the custom name blank. That's what it gets named to by default. And then upstream as Couchbase-server for the same reason. Then we're going to select run tool. This is what's going to be responsible for actually for managing the connection between the API and Couchbase. And it's also responsible for creating the Couchbase collection. So because of this client, once we reference a collection in our code, this collection gets auto-created in Couchbase. So there's no need for manual database configuration or management on our end. It's all taken care of by this client. And now essentially, if you're still a bit confused what this tool actually did, the first tool just scaffolded out the code for the Couchbase client, but this made sure that our given Couchbase server that we added and the Python Fast API instance that we have are communicating with each other using this client. Because you can imagine a scenario in which we would have multiple databases or even multiple APIs. So here we actually need to allocate which ones will use the client. This tool sets some values and secrets, and for us to get Polytope to definitely pick up on these, we should restart the stack. So if we click on Polytope UI and press Control C and then enter and wait for that to restart, and then press Start Lab again. That is going to reopen or reload our stack with all the main services running. So there is one more tool we need to run from the Bluetext UI, which is add entity. This scaffolds entity models for data store clients, in our instance, Couchbase. You can also see here where exactly it creates these entity files under model, Python, models, entities. So the last tool we're going to run is add entity. This scaffolds entity models for data store clients, in our instance, Couchbase. You can also see right here where it actually creates these files under models, Python, models, entities. We're going to also use this to reference a collection that Couchbase will then create automatically. I put the client as Couchbase, entity plural request, entity singular request, and language Python. We could add fields manually here, but I personally prefer to do that with a coding agent, which we'll do in the next step. And then our service instance is Couchbase. We're going to go ahead and run this tool. We can double check here under models, Python, models, entities, and we can see requests here. Once again, before we continue prompting, we can head on over to MCP servers and just make sure that Polytope is connected. So it hasn't started, so we're going to go ahead and start it just like we did before, and then we will have access to the Polytope MCP tools. So I've written my first prompt to the coding agent. I said, I've created an entity called requests. Please add fields for a technical maintenance request form used in a manufacturing or industrial environment. Include requester name, description of the issue, location. Also include additional fields relevant to industrial maintenance, such as equipment or machine ID. Maybe the coding agent will think of some more, maybe not, that's fine. And I'm going to go ahead and prompt the agent. Because the agent will run the initialize session tool, it'll become aware of the nature in which our app is running, so it'll know that we have to call, that it can call Polytope MCP servers, but it'll also be more aware of our project structure. So even before reading the files in our project, it will know where I have created this, this requests entity and where it should add the fields. So we can easily verify that the coding agent made changes, at least in the right place, and it added the fields right there. The next step is to actually expose this via an API endpoint and allow us to actually make a maintenance request form or submit a maintenance request form. I said right here, create an operation that allows me as a user to fill out a maintenance request application. And this should create an API endpoint that processes the maintenance requests that we fill out. I realized that maybe I wasn't explicit enough that it should actually create the API endpoints. In the previous prompt, I just said about the operation. So I'm here going to say create API endpoints for the API so we can expose the operation to other services if you didn't already. All right, so now Copilot has let me know that it's finished creating the API endpoints. So I assume that it didn't do it before, but you can now access the post request endpoint to create new maintenance request, claims Copilot. So we're going to go ahead and test that, but to test that, we need to make the front end. So for my prompt, I said, finally create a front end for our app, which allows us to fill out a maintenance request form and store them in the Couchbase collection requests for which we have created fields for. Also, make the front end look professional and clean. All right, now Copilot has let us know that it's created the front end, which is the final step of our full stack app. And now we can finally test it. So I'm going to go ahead and fill this with some random information. All right, so I saved this with my name and with a brief description of the issue. I'm going to press submit request. Here we see a pop-up saying maintenance request submitted successfully. If we go ahead and retrieve our docs from Couchbase, we should see 3. And then this is the JSON format of the maintenance request form that we just submitted. So now, taking what you learned from this, we encourage you to have a think of what you could build using the tools we made use of here to either come up with your own idea or do something else that uses a similar infrastructure. Because in the following stages of the workshop, we encourage you guys to work together to conceptualize something and then bring it to fruition using Bluetext tools. We will also be around to help you guys to actually make a more concrete plan of how to actually implement this with Bluetext.